Hello everyone. Today I'd like to present to you on a proposal I wrote before I left Joliet. This is a proposal for an escalation desk which would take the place of the current supervisor escalation process for both supervisor calls and supervisor escalated tickets. The written proposal, which I created before leaving Joliet, is attached to this email, so hopefully you can open that. I do refer to that within the presentation. So, to begin with, I am going to tell you two stories that occurred before I left Joliet. Story number one involves my former teammate David Rusiano. Now, David had a supervisor call before I left that had been a person that had already called back twice. So previously this person had a technical issue, I believe, with the internet, from what I could overhear with the call, and had a technician come out. After that technician came out, the customer spoke to the technician, got some specific tech information, and was referred to Tier 2. The customer spoke to Tier 2, specifically an agent named Luis, and got an additional support, but still did not receive everything they needed to receive in order to get their specific issue resolved. So apparently, according to, again, what I could overhear, the customer had requested while on the phone with Luis to speak to his supervisor. Now, this was during the transition with Tier 2, where I'm not sure if there was no supervisor or there was limited supervision from various supervisors. But somehow the customer did not receive either a callback or a conversation with the Tier 2 supervisor. So at that point, he called back in and reached my fellow teammate, David Rusiano. David did some initial troubleshooting, but again, this customer was asking to speak to a supervisor, and he specifically was asking to speak to Luis's supervisor. Now, David followed the current escalation procedure and went to get a supervisor who was within our assigned group of supervisors. Greg was not available at the time, and so David went to the next available supervisors. Eric and Troy are on our team, and then Christy Hammond and Amber Cavadal are our Tier 2 backup support supervisors in the event we need a supervisor and our supervisor's not available. It happened that for this particular call, David located Amber. So Amber did come do as requested of supervisors and take the call. After, granted, David had been on this call, I would say approximately 20 minutes. And you have to understand the customer was refusing to get off the call until he spoke to someone in Tier 2, specifically a Tier 2 supervisor. So Amber spent the next, I want to say, approximately 15 minutes. Again, I wasn't really involved in the call, so timing was a little bit off, but this was a very long call. So Amber was on the call for a while, was trying to convince the customer that we needed to roll a truck back out based on Luis's notes from Tier 2 and everything else that David had experienced and read on the account. The customer did not want a truck roll and insisted they were not going to get off the phone until they spoke to someone with Tier 2. So finally, towards the end of this conversation, Josh Sloan was able to come over, take the call, and from what I overheard, the customer did tell Josh some specific technical information that only one of our techs would have given, and it was information that would require Tier 2 and higher up techs involved in order to get the customer's issue resolved. And Josh was going to take over the situation and get the customer's situation resolved. This is one scenario, though, of how the current supervisor escalation process fails to address handle time as one of the Tier 1 agent's concerns, and it fails to support the supervisors in making sure that they are given the tasks that best support their abilities. Another example of the current escalation process not necessarily succeeding to the best of the ability of the West Division Small Business Care is where Evanson, another former member of my team, Team Calhoun, had a supervisor call. Again, Greg was not available for various reasons, and so Evanson went searching for a supervisor because in this particular case, Eric, Troy, and Amber and Christy all were unavailable as well. Now, after leaving the customer on hold for what I would say was approximately at least 4 minutes, if not longer, Christian Martins was able to come take the call, and the call was handled. But again, we're looking at extended handle time for that customer who's already irritated with Comcast, and we're looking at, the current escalation process not technically working either, because we still had to search, Evanson had to search for a supervisor that was outside the current assigned group of supervisors per the current escalation process. So the proposal that you have in front of you is for an escalation desk, which would be an extension of the current 1.5 help desk. Now, I do want to make sure that everyone understands this proposal was not created solely by me. It began as a discussion when I was on Kari Ernst's team, and I presented it partially to the members of my team when I was on Greg Calhoun's team, and then per their suggestion came up with the written proposal that you have in front of you that was attached to this email. And I just want to highlight a couple of things that are mentioned in that written proposal. Number one, the escalation desk, by allowing agents to transfer calls directly off after approximately 12 to 15 minutes or 3 attempts to de-escalate the customer, would reduce handle time for escalated phone calls. Because as I've previously mentioned in both stories, agents have still had to search for supervisors to take the call. And the supervisor has to be equipped to handle the situation. Depending on the situation, for instance, with a call that I had, Frank DeGuy, yes, while he assisted me with the call, had to go over to the other side of the building, I guess the WOM support team, to get some additional information on the timeline of a given process for a customer. So again, we're looking at a handle time increase for that. The other thing is we are looking at 3 sets of stakeholders when we have a call. We're looking at Tier 1 agents, supervisors, and of course the customers themselves. And one of the needs that would be eliminated if we did an escalation desk versus having individual supervisors take a call would be the need to add an additional role for supervisors as far as taking supervisor calls. And this would allow them to focus on employee development which was one of the Credo 2014 goals for the center, as well as administrative tasks, their personal development, again, a Credo goal for 2014, and things like S4B promo days and other special projects. If you look at a supervisor's week, they have 40 hours in a week that they have to work, approximately, assuming we want them to have a good work-life balance. 13 hours of that week on an average team goes to one-on-ones. Then you have approximately 3 hours of planning and implementing the team meetings for their team. Then you have 4 to 6 hours of supervisor huddles a week, and 1 to 3 hours to approve time as it is entered by their specific employees. And that approximately takes up half their week already. Then, of course, they have communications periodically. They need to get out to the team as far as stats and everything else. So, incorporating supervisor calls into their schedule does add a significant amount of work and possibly limit them from doing the best job they can on the leadership tasks we really need them to be working on. The rest of the potential needs we see the proposal meeting are on page 1 of the proposal. However, I do want to point out the other opportunity we see the escalation desk meeting is allowing for higher VOC and FCR scores for the center. Leaving customers on hold for an extended period of time when they're already irritated can cause lower VOC scores. Also, if all supervisors are not available due to meetings or holidays or other calls they're already taking, multiple customer call-ins could occur, therefore hurting the center's FCR. Now, you may ask how we planned on executing this escalation desk. The escalation desk, we planned on executing it by how it's presented on page 2 of the proposal. I'm not going to go over that in detail. Overall, I will say the feedback I received on that was excellent. The only missing component that a couple of people felt, specifically Mo and KE, was that we needed a queue for the escalation desk so that calls were not randomly dumped in that queue, and so that it could be managed. If it did get overwhelming, again, causing customers to be on hold, of course, supervisors would still be the backup for supervisor calls. And I do agree with them that there needs to be a queue. I think part of the reason that I initially did not include it was I was not sure how that would be done, but assuming it could be done, that would be the way to go. And like I said, this is supposed to be an extension of the current 1.5 desk, which already has a queue. So, in closing, I just want to present some of the results we are expecting if the SMB West Division Joliet Care decides to implement the escalation desk. Result number 1 is we expect to see a 3% increase in FCR and VOC. And then we expect to see a 3 to 5% decrease in handle time. We could see those numbers be even higher. Those were an estimate based off the numbers I had at the time. Then the biggest result you will want to look at is it does allow having centralized reporting on agents who are having a large number of soup calls and invalid Tier 2 tickets and need additional training. We all know there were agents like myself on the floor who did not have a very large number of soup calls, but then there are agents who have a large number of soup calls. And while the current proposal that Jack and Christy put together does allow for additional training, it is training that is not specific to agent, and there may be a specific reasons that the agent is having numerous soup calls. If there's more tracking about which agents are having soup calls, then more specific training can be done by supervisors who are not taking soup calls to address the specific issues and thereby improve those specific employees. And finally, with the centralized desk where agents don't have to go searching for supervisors and there is centralized knowledge of who needs additional training, we would expect overall increase in employee morale, both from a supervisor perspective and a Tier 1 agent perspective, which we all know that a happy workplace makes everyone want to come to work more than a non-happy workplace. So hopefully you can see how the escalation desk makes a lot of sense for Joliet Small Business Care. And I thank you for your time. Do know that I will be by soon. I hope everyone has a great day.